old.
Welcome to the Simple Minds podcast, where we look to empower and encourage real conversation amongst men everywhere by unpacking topics on self-help, philosophy, and business.
I'm Conrad Francis, and I'll be your host this week. And on this episode, I can't wait for this topic because we had a false start at this last year.
Just a warm-up.
Yeah, I guess it's a big one.
Oh, it's massive.
What's the topic, Conrad?
The topic is toxic masculinity and where do men turn to. And it's
What's
something
the drink, Conrad?
I'm really passionate about. I'll get to the drink, man. I'm the host.
Who's here, Conrad?
Well, fuck, if you can't tell by all the voices. we're in the company of all the Muppets. Michael.
Hello.
Justin.
What's up?
Travis.
Ahoy, hoy.
What?
Magic Matt Hannum.
It took you a while to think of that, didn't it?
I didn't know whether I was going to use it.
Hi.
Jacob.
Hello.
So I might be going out of script already, but anyway, we're drinking today a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, Marlborough region, 2008, guys. So I've actually gone to the cellar for you again.
Cheers, lads.
Enjoy.
Actually smells really good.
2008.
2008. What were you doing in 2008? What was I doing? That was pre-GFC.
I was in TAFE, studying photography first year.
I didn't think you actually studied. Probably needs a little bit more air.
2 years.
GFC just started. I started my first business.
Yeah.
Literally, like within a month.
It's interesting, but like when you get to go to those ages and wines, and that's the conversation. What were you doing that year? Is a really interesting conversation. I usually drink some of this older stuff with one of my old mentors, and he's 65, nearly 70 years of age, so you get to get some history lessons from him. All right, so back to the topic, gentlemen. Toxic masculinity. Where do men turn to now? This topic was tabled originally around Father's Day last year, where the four of us who were fathers then, Michael, myself, Matt, and Jacob, tried to do it some justice. And if we're fair with it, I don't believe we did, which kind of proved the point of the whole topic was that we as men are struggling to accept our masculinity in the current world for whatever reason. Maybe it's the rise of women or movements like the Me Too movement that are putting more emphasis on women and where women fit in society, which, again, for the record, I'm not opposed to. But I think the contrast has been with the rise of understanding women and their desires and their goals and their opportunities and all of those other things. I think it's come at the demise of men and our simple lives. And I say simple because men historically have been providers to family units and communities, and women have been nurturers of the family unit. And with the last 20 to 30 years, there's been a change in that. It's been double income families. It's been women seeking to be in more authoritative roles, which is fine. But we're starting to hear now the commentary around how many women are sitting on a board of a company and what is the ideal number, as opposed to what is the ideal number of ideal people for any of those positions. And so I do take a lot of umbrage at those conversations, and I'm a father of a daughter, so I really do want my daughter to succeed in life. And for a large part of that too, I was a single father of a daughter, and that has its own stigmas attached to it. So I just want to throw the topic open and see where you guys are at. Just some preferencing where this comes from. I mean, there's a lot of Jordan Peterson stuff on this topic. Jordan also references some numbers such as 65% of all suicides under 35 years of age are attributed to males. There's an exponential rise at the moment in depression and anxiety related medications being used by males. 85% of all sleeping disorders at the moment are being attributed to males. 93% of all men that are of all incarcerations globally are men. So the numbers are on the rise. And even more so in the last entrance into universities in WA. And I think this is a number that has increased. The disparity between women entering versus men entering is growing. With anybody pays any attention to these numbers. And they're the things I ask myself, well, why? Anybody got some?
I think the big question here is the feminist movement seeking equality everywhere and equality of outcome compared to equality of opportunity, where equality of opportunity gives everybody should have the opportunity to be the best person they can be, but it shouldn't be defined by you must have 5 women on the board of this company, or this course must have 50% male, 50% female. And they're doing it in Sweden just now, or one of the Scandinavian countries, where they've gone full egalitarian. So everything is focused on giving everybody opportunity. And what's actually happened is the exact opposite of what they thought. Women have gone more for the caring roles, men have still gone down the path. So without any cultural sort of influence, or seemingly cultural influence on where you're going in life, women and men have naturally gone into what we would say as the sort of, from a biological perspective, the caring roles, and the what would you call it from the male perspective, the
protector, the
protecting
provider,
role. So it's kind of naturally happened. So that there is a very strong, I think anyways, still a very strong biological or evolutionary sort of connection with it. Whereas that's kind of being dismissed now and like quashing maleness. The Gillette ad is the perfect example of virtue signaling and sort of just ridiculously stereotypical, saying that all men are bad. I mean, this is the dialogue, which is only coming from a small amount, but a very vocal amount of people. Yep. Stopping boys tussling because it's bad to fight. I mean, it's just getting to a ridiculous stage where there's no conversation about what we actually are as people, as individuals.
Language is important too, right?
Yeah,
so I think one of the things that really gets me about this, a lot of all the commentary around the Gillette ad as well, which if you haven't seen that, it's worth.
I like the ad, by the way.
I do too.
It's a great message. Be a good person.
Be a good person.
But the way it was done was so one-sided and just so manipulative that it was just a bit. It rubbed me the wrong way.
It's the word toxic, right? So there's a big difference between, in my view, masculinity and toxic masculinity.
Yeah, but that's always existed, right?
But two very different things. And I think they're always clouded in some of this conversation. Toxic masculinity to me is the pack mentality, I guess the wolf whistle, or the that type of a sort of wolf pack men's approach. And I think masculinity is a very different thing. To be a strong masculine male is a very different thing to what I would consider toxic masculinity.
Yeah, well, what they're saying is like all men are like this. Like, I mean, which is 99% of the men I know are good people that don't wolf whistle at women and don't do this and don't be an arsehole at work. I mean, it just comes down to the individuals. There are dickheads, women that are horrible people. There are men that are horrible people. But I think as a general rule, most people are actually pretty good. And I think this sort of seeing society as just dominated by male. I mean, obviously,
but it has been because through the ages, men have been the ones that have had to go out and get a job.
Yeah, but obviously, I mean, that was a lot to do with obviously having babies.
Yeah, exactly right.
And stuff like that. And then the bringing on of like contraception and sort of women's hygiene products and stuff like that has allowed women to be more flexible in what they can do, because it was seen before that men would be the protector, women would be at home. It's obviously opened up now, and of course, opportunity is great for everybody.
See, my mum, my ideology of a typical woman is the imprint of my mother. Now, my father went out and worked for about 40 years of his life and provided the cash. Mum joined him in the workforce late in life. But I know who wore the pants in that family. And it wasn't my dad.
Yeah.
All right. The nurturer, the protector, whilst Dad went and provided, and yes, Dad had the strength.
Yep.
Mum had all the power.
And over history, women have been seen like that. They've been the powerful being, and the nurturer, the mother. So
this whole Me Too movement and the rise of the woman is really confusing me, because I always believe, and I always say to every woman, that women have always had the power.
Yep.
But there is, I think, when coming back to the toxic masculinity, I was watching, to be honest, masculinity, like one of the questions you'd posed in the pre-notes was, how are you addressing the topic of masculinity in your life? And I actually had to be like, I don't consciously am aware of masculinity, and I guess there's two parts to this, of like an education piece of like men are confused in general of like what is
masculinity
mean,
and
because of all the rise of vocalism of equal rights and all of that jazz. And I was watching a video which was presented by a woman who said that actually, if we try to make men more like women and more feminine, we actually enable more toxic masculinity, and actually comes on the rise, because bad men don't become good when they stop being men. which is the whole good person element, which is a really powerful statement, I thought. And actually, masculinity can be harnessed for good, because in good masculinity actually stamps out toxic masculinity, because men are meant to be more the, obviously war. She was talking about war, rape, and I guess crime are very big with men. But on the flip side, men are also the ones who fight for good, who have the courage and can be the hero. So, you need strong men to actually fight the toxic masculinity. So she made the statement that if there was stronger masculinity still in society, actually would stamp out toxic masculinity more so, which was a really interesting concept.
But that's society in general, right? I mean, we have a way of self-regulating regardless of what the laws tell us. Human beings have self-regulated themselves and self-governed themselves for a lot longer than what laws were around for.
But there are a lot of negative influences, and there are moments where I'm sure we've all been toxic men, and particularly when you get into the pack, and even when you as men don't feel good about yourself, it can be comforting to go down that path. And then we have the subconscious biases as well, right?
But in saying that, right, I mean, when you talk about this pack mentality, I mean, I've been a single bloke for a long time. I would almost turn around and say to you right now, point blank, the pack mentality is not in a man. There's a lot more women out there.
That's true. When they get together,
there's a lot more women out there. And here's one for you. I mean, I happened to volunteer to help a mate of mine who was a stripper, all right, male stripper, and he was doing.
What did you do?
I was just picking up his clothes after his shows. He had 4 shows that night, and I was driving him to his shows and picked up his gear and stuff.
Is that all you picked
Yep. But what I observed versus, and I've been to a few Bucks nights in my time, what I observed was that it was, to me, a real level of uncomfortableness by what I saw from females versus what I saw by males.
There's definitely a double standards out there. Women are and again, this is the whole point. I feel like I have to tiptoe around saying what I'm about to say.
Well, you don't. This is exactly the point we're at.
That women are all okay to be take your top off and 6-pack and all that, very vocally and very but if men do that, that's bad. We're objectifying women, but women objectify men so much more acceptable than us objectifying women. And look, it's because of the history of humans, maybe has a big influence in that, but that's an example of the double standards of
But I think the bigger point was the fact that you felt like even saying that you were going to get condemned for at some stage.
Yeah, exactly. And even in the entrepreneur space, there's a massive rise of girl boss and empowering women, which is amazing. But then if men create a group, we've copped slack for our 7 a.m. Brekkie Club because
and this podcast
because we're all men, and it's but if it was an all female podcast, it would be hailed as yes,
earth-shattering and groundbreaking and empowering.
And again, you have to no disrespect whatsoever.
Go and do it.
But there's definitely double standards in society, which I think is confusing everyone and fucking everyone up.
Well, one of my challenges when you look at what is our future? So if you roll back to where we bring this aggression and strength and what we've got, we used it to move things, to move rock, to hunt, to do all these things in our future. And then now we've been through this industrial revolution, and now we're in this information age. And let's face it, most women I know are a hell of a lot better at doing the tasks that need to be achieved within my business. Now, that I'm not saying whether it's a minor task or a major task, and ironically, we look at administration like it's a lesser thing, but the top end of business is business administration, which is all just getting things done, tasks management. Now, most women I know that do it are a hell of a lot better than me at it. You don't need me to pick up rocks. There's machines and shovels and other things that can do that. Where do we stand? Moving forward, and what do we bring to the table that a woman can't just themselves, apart from this masculinity piece, the ability to obviously procreate, which obviously there's ways that we can
They don't need us to procreate.
They don't need it either. But I don't think they're going to be able to do this themselves going forward. Some might, but there is a balance, and I feel like what we lack is the celebration of the differences in who we are.
Yeah, and that's my biggest beef with equality as a concept, is that we shouldn't be trying to make men and women the same. That's
easy to say. You're a man.
Yeah, of course. That if you set aside individual differences, in general, men are better at certain things. Women are better at certain things. That's why you have more male soldiers and you have more female nurses. Yeah. Men are better at typically things that are, I guess, physical or require dominance, whereas women tend to be better at things where you need to be nurturing and caring. And of course, there are
extremes
there are men that make exceptionally good nurses, and there would be potentially women that make good soldiers. But in general,
that's at the ends of the spectrum.
But I was listening to a podcast where, according to science, like again coming back to the biology thing, our brains are fundamentally wired differently.
Yeah.
Like
there is biological differences.
There is actually biological
there is.
differences between a man's and a woman's.
And you can't, and that might change over time again, right?
And it has. Well, it has.
But the time frame it's going to take to change isn't a generation.
No. It's thousands, hundreds
of thousands.
Yeah. And that's the big thing is the culture. They're pushing that it's all culture. Like gender is based purely on culture. We've been told that you're a man, you're a woman, you do this, you do that. You're the patriarchal society. It's sort of like it's been the argument that it's all cultural, which obviously parts of it are, but I think a massive part of it, which we're never going to get away from, unless it's 100,000 years down the track, is the biological urges and that have been in evolution for the last 50,000, 100,000 years. It's very hard, as you said, you can't break that in 100 years.
And it's hard to know what is nature and what is nurture. Like Matt, for example, you have a son and a daughter, and I'd imagine naturally your son wants to play with teddies and soccer balls and footballs, whereas your daughter potentially plays with dolls and kitchenettes, etc. Is that something that they just naturally pick up and do identify with, or is it something that's handed to them? Like you'll just give a girl a doll, for example, because that's just what you think girls should do.
That's a little different. It's handed to them. So my son has, in early days, put on dresses, his sister's dresses a lot. He's watching what she's doing. Like she's a major role.
Watching what dad's doing.
Well, yeah, watching what dad's doing, sure. I guess. Watching what someone's doing anyway. But and that's, for us, we're like, whoa, hang on. But then if you roll back into history, like even like 80 years, all little boys wore dresses. They used to wear white like clothing as infants, and they were all dresses because it was quick and easy to change nappies. It's something we've constructed, but what I noticed is it's not what they're holding. They start to hold different things, and he's certainly copied his sister, but then became much more masculine or boy-like in the things that he was playing with. But if you watch a little closer, he just does it differently. Just because they both have a doll in their hand, he's probably like banging it around,
ripping the head off.
Yeah, he's doing it differently. It doesn't matter what's in his
splits.
hand.
No,
his approach is different. So we are conditioning him, or he has been conditioned by all his surrounds to change what he's doing in terms of what he's like, no, I don't want that anymore. That's a girl thing. I want this thing. But his behaviour, his attitude, his approach to whatever it is that's in his hands is still very different. He's much more boisterous, whereas my daughter is much more reserved, thoughtful, and approaches things very differently at their age.
You're saying it naturally pushes through anyway, no matter if you give
naturally,
it. Yeah.
Well, two things. Nature is one of the things, right? But it is. Once he leaves your house and goes to school, then you've got the societal impact. And I get that's where the toxic masculinity becomes more obvious. Yep. You know, the bullies, the gangs, and that type of stuff. I get that. But again, I don't just believe it's just on a masculine side.
It's on all sides, yeah. Human nature, I think, is quite cruel sometimes. So
there's a lot of like, now everyone gets a trophy and acknowledged, and I think there's also just a lot of PC in general is influencing both sides in negative ways. political correctness in both
And
sides.
it's potentially impacting the levels of resilience we have in our kids.
Oh, definitely.
You
They're
know,
not
it's-
facing the failure or the understanding that they've done something wrong or not right or whatever it is. They're not
Participation.
processing that.
But where is it okay? Where is it okay to be outwardly saying we need to hire another woman for a board? Where is that okay? But you can't call somebody black. Where is that okay? And how has it become okay?
Do you stop at femininity, or you ginger
Well,
hair? Like,
I think
where
it's-
do we break down society?
But it
into
is. It's a
groups?
complete segregation of issues.
Yeah.
And we become super tolerant of this, but super intolerant of other things.
As I said, it's like a minority that are quite vocal. Like the feminist movement is very vocal in its attack. So you hear a lot more about it.
But they have reason to be as well.
What reason? Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay.
Anybody has a reason
Okay,
to be
who-
upset about something.
Who walks home late at night here and is scared? No one probably sitting in this room.
As a kid, actually, I remember being a little bit scared.
You
of
talk to a female, and majority of females are scared.
Yep.
They'll have their keys. They'll be on their phone talking to someone, so they're genuinely scared.
Yep.
So they do have some merit, I think, to the.
Yeah, but that's not a new thing, Trav.
No, of course not. But it is something that we need to change.
For sure.
I don't want say if I have a daughter or daughters, I don't want my daughters to grow up in a world where they can't go home where it's safe.
But
It's not a safe world, Travis.
But yeah,
It's
I
a
think
scary
that's
world out
nirvana,
there.
mate. I mean, you go back to the earliest text you can ever read, and rape existed then.
Yeah.
And it's not that we've tolerated it; we've punished it from those days.
And it's not saying that it's good or bad, or well, it's bad, obviously.
I've
but
never
it's not
championed it.
saying
I've
that
never postcarded it. But I'll go. I mean, I'll go on the record and say, you know, wolf whistles and stuff. I've never done them. And I've got a daughter, and I think, you know, I said to myself, well, would I really mind? I mean, my daughter's been involved in modelling, right? And you know how the stereotypical stuff around that and how that defines people. But you know, and Jacqueline and I talk a lot about this type of stuff, and it does come down to the character of the individual.
Yeah.
It really does. For her to accept herself to be okay, to be wolf whistled at, and to be judged, and to be poked fun at, and to be whatevered, she had to deal with herself. And she's had her battles through different things, mentally and physically.
Yep.
And I think just because there's a problem, removing the problem doesn't allow the child, in my daughter's instance, to develop the mechanism she needed to become the best version of herself she's become.
Well, it was really interesting. It's the stories you tell yourself. I remember Joanne talking about wolf whistling. She actually quite liked. I remember her saying, "I don't get wolf whistled anymore. Like, what's happening? Like, why when I walk past this area?" But she saw that, I suppose, to a degree, as used that as a positive for her. Like, I must be looking all right. Like, I mean, what's bad about that? Is there anything
Affirmation.
bad about that?
Well, there was like in the same one video that I was watching, it was like no woman that admits that they like a really feminine man. They do want a man. I guess again coming back to that biological thing. But Hato, you do raise a really interesting point, which is true.
That is very true. That point is very true. But I'll flip that point.
But I guess which is open for debate to what level, because that'll continue to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to be the toxic
20
side of
years.
whatever it looks like.
And it's something that we can't stop in society.
Well, then let's talk about the persecution of males in the family court. You know, that's something I've lived.
Yeah.
All right? And fathers and mothers are treated very differently in the family court.
Absolutely.
I mean, is that changing a little bit?
No, it hasn't.
It's not?
No, and I've fought for change. You know, so we talk about that, and I think, yeah, that's real. And the potential of that happening is real. This is what's happening in the family court on a day-to-day basis is actually happening every day.
I mean, it's a very common thing in all areas of all minorities, and like a lot of people use history. Like, so that's like an example of double standard in some aspects, where men have always been known to do that, which then is used to justify X, Y, and Z. But then men in other areas will get fucked over, but they can't use that.
Yeah, they can't use
In
it.
another area because that's not okay. But then other minorities can do the same thing as well.
So,
But it's not just minorities. You look at verbal abuse within relationships. You know, that's some crazy stat, like 1 in 3 or something. That is an astonishing stat that hasn't come to light yet. It's just starting to. I'm seeing a lot more campaigns about it. And that's something that we really need to...
because you're focused on language.
Yeah, exactly. But that's something that we really need to grasp as males.
Do you think it's more education and conversation around what is masculinity and what is actually positive and constructive?
I think,
because I think some people, men, just don't know, and they get so confused, and they end up using toxic masculinity to satisfy the natural components of being a man. So, for example, I don't know, I can't really relate fully, but say domestic violence, which is a real issue, and it is a men's thing that they need to really deal with, and it does happen on the
it happened on the outside. I had fucking stuff thrown at me. Yeah, and it does happen.
Yeah, but generalization.
Yeah, and that's the problem. We are generalizing, and that's the big problem.
Yeah, but men who do that, if they had a better education and felt better about themselves to be good men, would they still do that? Are they acting out to feel masculine?
Well, flip it around. I mean, we talk about law of attraction. Where is the point that a woman has attracted herself into that situation
to victim mentality?
Yeah. So what does she need to learn to allow herself to become better and not tolerate?
Whoa! As a man, take responsibility.
Sure, yeah. I'm not saying that, but everybody needs to.
No,
everybody does need to. But when we're going to play the victim or the victor, if you can use that negativity as a learning tool for you to become better about yourself, why did that happen? Why did you allow that to happen? And that's the problem. Like when you start, and I've talked to a lot of women, and I say, well, I'm going to ask you a question. You're going to hate it. Why did you put yourself in that situation? Oh, what do you mean, Conrad? He did it to me. I said, no. You allowed that to happen because it never just happens. It's a build-up of a series of things. Yeah?
Yeah.
Right? It starts here, it gets here, and it gets here, and it gets bigger as you go, and then we all define that moment, not this moment. But we all do it.
Yep.
And I say it's real simple. Like if a dog shits in your house, you tell it off. You don't wait for it to shit 10 times.
And then have diarrhea. Going back to your point, Justin, about if you stamp it out completely, it actually becomes even worse. The toxic masculinity sort of
becomes exaggerated even more.
Yeah, so say if equality really goes to the next level, right? And women are in all the power positions and have
equality of opportunity, not outcome. So not being set that
exactly.
You must have this, and this. But
say if it goes into outcomes, right? Hypothetically.
Yep.
And then the male's role in society has to change.
That's exactly what I said in Scandinavia. They've done that. They've had opportunity of outcome where you must have this on the board, you must do that. We're pushing women into engineering, but it's actually had the opposite effect.
Exactly. But say if it did, as a male, how would we cope with it? Because everything's been ripped from under the rug. We're no longer the provider. We can't be the nurturer, the sole nurturer as the kid. You can't breastfeed the kid, or the children that are being there. So all this stuff is being taken away from you. Not taken away from you, but is different. It's a different process from when it was 100 years ago. So how does a male then navigate their feelings, I guess, and their masculinity as a male and their...
Yeah, where's the education for that, right? Because I believe there's an element that you can get to, right? Yes, you can't breastfeed at the moment.
Yeah.
But you can bottle feed, right? Even with fake breasts.
Which I did.
And so there's an element of that stuff you can do. The empathy and the nurturing part is something we need to learn, but then where do we learn it from? When there is no education around there about this for men, that's either, and if it exists, I don't know about it, which means there's no Mr. Two movement or whatever the fuck you want to call it. That's the problem. Who's going to speak up?
It's role models. There's a lack of role models in society, I think, which is like broken homes where the boys are being sort of raised in.
Yeah.
So we'll probably end up more nurturing, I suppose, depending on what the household's like, what's in there. But without a father figure or a male figure, it's hard to learn.
And it comes back to being okay with that. Like, I mean, I tell you now, if any woman wants to marry me and make me be the home mother, I'm happy to do it.
Hey, ladies.
Right? Happy to do it.
Are you really?
Yeah, for sure, man.
So is because
Then there'll be your innate nature that will conflict at some point.
yeah.
Potentially.
Because men are generally more ambitious and, like I said, than the provider and all that.
But it's what you value as provision, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure I'd like the opportunity to value other things that opportunity gives me. And being a single father, I had to work hard. And when I didn't have my daughter, I had to work even harder. But when I had my daughter, I had to balance that time. And when she was in my proximity, I had to give her my time. I had to cook. I had to clean. I had to make sure everything was done. All right, so I had to wear both hats for a good 13 years or nearly 13 years of my life. And both of them stimulated me. Someone asked me, Conrad, what were you like when your daughter was around versus when your daughter wasn't around, i.e. week 1, week 2. Week 1 was a lot more fun, a lot more hanging out with Jacqueline, doing stuff with her, shopping, all that stuff you do with kids, movies, all that stuff. You cook different meals, and then you include them and you watch different things. And then when she wasn't around, I went deep down in the work because I had to play catch up because I still valued my role as a role model for her. And I knew that in those 0 to 4, 0 to 8 age brackets in which I was in her life, I was imprinting into her something that she needed to see. And so she saw a man, whether she gives it any credit or not, that balanced both sides of the ledger. Now, she may not know that in her front conscious state right now, but it's in her subconscious. It's deep in her psyche.
I'm about to start a family, and it's already cooking.
It's happened already.
But that's a conversation that Ashby and I have had a lot because I really want to be that nurturing father as well as that provider.
Of course.
And Ashby really wants to be that nurturing mother as well as a provider too. So she doesn't want to step out of providing too. And it was that we've had in-depth conversations about doing both roles together and not being the old generation of men being provider and women, women just nurturing. And I don't know if I'm going to get it right, but it's something that I would really like to try and work at. So then we co-parent in every single way.
Well, especially you've got your own business,
Yeah.
So you've got the flexibility there to be part of the kid's life. Whereas traditionally, if you're working a 9-to-5 job back in the 50s, you were away from the home, come back at night.
Yeah.
Like I looked after the kids. Joanne got a full-time job when I think Emma was probably about 3 or 4. That's where I started my business, from home. And I was the one dropping off, picking up, doing all that sort of stuff. So and to this day, still cook most of the meals at home. So I've definitely got a very nurturing side. So
I have a question. Obviously that, like the conversation that you were just saying, just thinking about some of the innate natures of men and women. Like you've got ambitions. And I'm not saying that, women don't have ambitions, but generally we see men, again, generalizations, which is, it's difficult because there's always isolated, scenarios, but exceptions to the rule. But, you're naturally going to be the provider in some aspect. Okay, let me get clear. There are more men who start businesses than women. Generally, it feels like that. I mean, all of us in the room, and maybe it's the ecosystem.
I don't know the numbers, so.
But yeah, maybe we need to check the numbers. But in the ecosystems that I'm in, that's how it feels, and it could be wrong. So there does seem to be a natural law of order that kind of defaults you to that status anyway.
We've had these conversations. Subconsciously, you still know that it sort of falls back on you, don't you, as a male? And that's something that I've grappled with.
That's your default.
That's your own.
But but the bridging gap is communication, though, right? That is the massive bridging gap, and I think that's fundamentally where the flaw is in society. Full stop. Anyway, we become terrible communicators.
Because I know all of us, we would encourage and support our partners if they wanted to take the ambitious route, but not all men are like that as well.
I think most are, though. This is the thing. I think most are understanding and able to communicate with their partners. Do
you think?
I think so. I think
have you watched Maths lately?
Watch what?
But that's only
6 guys in the room here.
But that's only because their role models and their imprints have been what they are. That doesn't mean they can't accept, which means it's really important to understand how you communicate that and why you really want to go to the workplace. Now, you and Ashby have had communications or conversations around what's important to you guys. All right, you have that's the first step, and now Ashby can either honour that or dishonour it.
Because going with
and vice versa,
like you're saying, everyone's kind of like
not everyone. I said a majority,
but men, because of the current situation, like an ego and things like that, may suppress doing that because of, again, the confusion state that we're
out
in.
of this room here, the 6 of us have nurturing sides and support our partners and have the conversations. So I mean, there's
because we're having the conversation in this room because of the people we're surrounded by, but the majority of men don't talk.
Majority of men, I don't think.
But where's the forum? I think that's the thing, right? We're coming back to where is the forum? Where is the beat your hand on your chest acceptance of who you are, who you're allowed to be.
Groups like Proud Boys have popped up because of this sort of backlash.
I don't even know them, mate.
Never heard of it.
I have a look, actually. It's really interesting. It's a group of American guys that get together as a sort of anti-feminism movement to...
Yeah, see, I'm not anti-feminism. I'm not anti-feminism. I'm just strong on masculinity. And I've coached. I go back to my coaching. I've coached women and men.
Yep.
I spent my first half of my senior basketball coaching women's teams, and then the back half where I've had probably more success coaching men's teams. Now, I don't think that's a coincidence either. I mean, I got thrust into the role of coaching women's team, and it was fun. And what I learnt was how to communicate with women and how to manage their emotional states better, because women are highly emotive beasts. And then when I flipped the switch and came back to coaching men, what I realised is that a lot of the times that my communication skills got better because you had to be clearer when you were coaching women. But what you were managing wasn't emotions, it was largely egos. That's with the top end. But what I've seen coming through with the younger guys coming through is that they are emotional beasts in themselves. Is that fair to say, Trav?
Yeah.
So we are dealing with a hell of a lot more emotions in the younger kids, and I'm having more conversations with the younger guys that I coach. It's kind of funny, but we are getting to that point where younger men are emotional beasts.
So what do we do?
But they have no direction. They have no idea how to use those emotions. So what do? We've just got to keep opening up conversations, checking in with each other and looking for opportunities to have the real conversation, instead of either choosing not to see it or choosing not to acknowledge it. I said I've created a life where that happens for me anyway, right? I'm in my office with my clients, with my basketball teams, with the groups that I hang around. They're all there. I'm there to support men largely, right? My life is that way.
Which doesn't mean you don't support women.
Which doesn't mean I don't support women, because the number one woman in my life is my daughter.
Yeah.
And then my mother, and then my sister. So I respect women like you wouldn't believe. However, I will never dishonour a man. We're all shaking heads. Long pregnant pause. We can call Ashby.
Can you say that? Pregnant pause.
Pregnant pause. And I guess we went a little bit off topic from toxic masculinity. I mean,
it's a massive topic.
And like I said, I don't think we'll ever be able to remove it from society. In my opinion, I'm just massive on giving men a voice, allowing them to know that their points are valid, albeit some of them might be Neanderthal. I don't really care. But their points are valid, and there is a path forward. And for every person out there, let alone men, please don't ever think you're on your own, and you're not. You don't need a group. You have a whole gender on your side. Just be brave enough to ask questions and open yourself up, and you will be surprised about what you find, whether it be through the internet or whether it be through your immediate communities. But there are a lot of people out there that can offer help and guidance and be better role models if you want a better outcome in your life.
You find that a lot of people are going through the same thing or thinking the same thoughts, and all it takes is just to ask, really, doesn't it?
Yep. I'm not happy with the suicide rates, gents. I mean, that's been something I've been reading for the last few years.
That's an interesting one, though, because from a point of per 100,000 per capita. From the 50s to now, it's round about the same in regards to male.
Yeah, but the percentage is the same, but the numbers, because of the percentage of the growing population, is
Definitely.
big.
It's interesting though, men with suicide are more likely to succeed in suicide due to the fact, from a biological point of view, they actually do it better. They're better at committing suicide than women. They're more intent.
Yeah, because they're doers, mate.
Which is a really
They
interesting...
get shit done.
Because it's three or four times more men commit suicide than women, but
Yeah.
a lot of that is down to the fact that they actually do it. When that's better is probably the wrong word, but they succeed at doing it more, which is an interesting stat. So
I wonder if that's to do with men seeking suicide as an outlet is, I guess, genuine is probably the wrong word, but like a lot of people do it, especially younger people these days, as a bit of a cry for help. They weren't genuinely trying to kill themselves; they were just trying to get some attention.
It's the ones that talk about it aren't going to do it, based on my experience and what I've been reading. Right, it's the silent majority out there that don't know that they have a voice or don't know how to speak about what it is they're dealing with.
And to everyone else, it comes out of nowhere. So I never knew. We'd never spoken about this before. Whereas,
Well, I had 3 men in the last quarter of last year take their lives.
yeah.
All right, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure.
Should you add that there are services out there?
Yeah, there are. And we'll put some numbers on the podcast and stuff. But without the services, just be brave enough to ask a question of someone.
could be us. Reach out to us.
Yeah, happy to have a chat. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.